Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
I was speaking in previous days about how in Vedic culture there are many rules and regulations. Often in our devotees from the Western countries, they find this difficult to relate to, because the rules and regulations of Vedic life cover every aspect of life. Today the ladies are on one side, that's nice. We made some progress. So, yeah, every aspect of life, and at every moment of the day is covered by, everything that one does is covered by various rules. Prabhupada he had the first deity worship started in 1968 in San Francisco, the first deity worship in our movement, which consisted of worshipping Jagannath by offering him arati. Arati consisted of lighting a lamp and putting it on a plate. One devotee would offer it round and round like this, and then he would pass it to someone else, and they'd do like this, and it would go on like that. And all the devotees, men and women, in their t-shirts and jeans. And so one of the devotees asked Prabhupada, well, is there anything more to do in worship than this? Prabhupada said, yes. But if I told you, you would faint. But gradually Prabhupada introduced more and more rules and regulations for worship. And he wanted that the devotees, they develop and understand this Vaishnava culture more and more. But at the same time he was very careful in introducing it, because he knew that in the beginning it would be difficult for people to accept so many things all at once. Now sometimes devotees, they cite Srila Prabhupada, the kind of instruction he gave in the early days of ISKCON, that in the early days, well, devotees, they didn't wear dhotis, or they just wore kami clothes, dhotis or saris. And so they say, well, you see, Prabhupada allowed it, so it's okay. And even in the later days of ISKCON, Prabhupada also, he didn't reject anyone for not dressing in dhoti or sari. But he did, in general, expect a higher standard. For instance, it's just one of many examples. He once told a disciple who came to see him without tilak that you should, when you come before your spiritual master, you should have tilak. Actually, you should have tilak all the time. So we shouldn't take the most lenient instruction or allowance that Prabhupada made and think that that is the acceptable standard. And if sometimes Prabhupada made it, if he made an exception to the rule, we shouldn't take it that's a permanent allowance and that becomes the rule. For instance, Prabhupada was very insistent that devotees rise early in the morning, attend Mangalati. So if in some cases he didn't insist on that, we shouldn't take it to mean that, well, it doesn't matter, because he didn't. If one time in 100 he didn't insist on it, then we shouldn't take it that, oh, all right, it's okay, it doesn't matter. So Srila Prabhupada, he wanted to introduce this Brahminical culture, which means high class, high standard. That culture which helps us to realize Brahma, or the absolute truth. And actually, Brahminical culture it's another term that we can use interchangeably with Vedic culture, Varnashram culture, because even the other castes, they follow this Brahminical culture to a large extent. So maybe I can just go through a few practical things, just like this separation of the sexes. This is very important. There's no training in this in the modern age, or rather the opposite. Thanks to Herr Freud, now we have a different concept of how the genders should mix up. But we'll find, not only in India, but actually all over the world in traditional cultures, the sexes were separated from a young age. Even until recently, even in the Western countries, it wasn't that it would be considered very wrong for young men to walk up to young women and just who they don't know and just start talking to them. They've made such a wrong culture in the modern age that a man can just walk up to a woman he doesn't know and start flirting with her. So needless to say, this is not at all conducive for spiritual life. However, even within our own society of devotees, because we haven't been specifically trained in these things, we may still act in ways which are part of the Western culture, which is detrimental to Krishna consciousness. Just like this morning, I was sitting with one brahmachari talking to him, and one lady came up to speak to me, and she came and sat right next to me. I mean, within 2 centimeters or something. Actually, she was closer to him than me. So I indicated that she should move back a bit. So she moved further away from me, but just to the other side of him, and still only 2 centimeters away from him. So, I mean, I don't think she had any bad intention or any such thing. But it's just simply the way people interact with each other in the modern way of life, and there's been no training not to do in any other way. It may be different in different parts. I think still among the Muslim republics and Central Asia, there's still that culture may be strong to some extent. But as far as like European Russia, and it's in this regard, it's just as degraded as anywhere else in the West. So, I mean, this is only one aspect of gender, intergender behavior. In general, there should be much reserve and caution. A young man can joke with his grandmother, or women of that age group, but not with other young women, not with young women, except his wife. You see, even to joke and be very friendly with someone else's wife, even if he's your good friend, even that's not proper. In the modern age, you think, well, we're just being friendly. It's good to be friendly. We should be very friendly. And they become so friendly that they run off with their best friend's wife. This actually happens. I'm not just saying it facetiously. There was one community of devotees living in the country in Western Europe, one place in Western Europe. I'm telling an anecdote.
Community of devotees?
Yeah, living in the country in one place in Western Europe. So they decided from the beginning that they want to follow all these rules of proper behavior from the beginning. So they are very strict. The Matajis only associated with each other and with their husbands. But after some time they thought, well, some of the members thought this is too extreme, this is artificial. So they loosened it up a bit, and they allowed that different Matajis, they'd mix with men and be friends with them and all this thing. And within a few months, one married woman ran off with someone else. One man who was married ran off with his friend's wife, thus spoiling 2 families and actually the whole community. So these are things we should consider very carefully, and even devotees themselves should be very strict in this regard. It's not that, you see, any young man should just walk up to any man should just walk up to any woman and start talking to her, or vice versa. Also, parents should train their children like this. I'll speak more about family life tomorrow. This is a very basic principle. I mean, I'm just observing in day-to-day life, right this very morning, how these principles are not being taught. So these, like I say, these are very basic principles of human civilization. We're talking about coming to the highest platform of spiritual life, but at least we should start off with the basic platform of human civilization. If we're living at subhuman level, like animal level, the dogs and cats, they have no restrictions, then where's the question of coming up to the transcendental level? Now I'm seeing within our movement that to a large extent we're trying to practice Krishna consciousness, but with Western culture. In other words, we chant Hare Krishna, and we accept some trappings of the Krishna conscious way of life, such as wearing dhotis and saris sometimes. But at the same time, our social dealings are based on Western culture, and our whole way of thinking, our mindset, is in many ways still very much influenced by the culture we were brought up in. This isn't going to work, because the Western culture is meant for going to hell. the Western culture trains people to be demons and to go to hell. Whereas the Vedic, I'll explain that a little bit more. Because the modern way of life is based on sense gratification. The main motive is to enjoy life. I saw a statement about 2 years ago by an American student, in which he said that the American culture is the most developed in history, the most advanced, because, he explained, it gives its members the best opportunity and freedom to pursue happiness. And of course their idea of happiness is eat, sleep, drink, be merry and enjoy, for tomorrow we shall all be dead. That whole culture is based on sense indulgence, which is why it is not, in the true sense of the term, actually human culture at all. It's animal culture. As Prabhupada said, cats and dogs don't need Freud. In other words, Freud is talking all this stuff about, sex and giving up taboos, but the cats and dogs, they don't need any Freud to tell them. They just get on with it. They just have sex whenever they can. So, by the grace of Herr Freud, we have now become advanced to the level of animals. So a Vedic culture it begins with sense control, understanding that the senses are a network of paths leading to hell. So the whole ethos is completely different in Western culture and in Vedic culture. That's why when we take to devotional service, we have to be very, very serious, otherwise we're going to get swallowed up in the whirlpool of the whole materialistic civilization. For instance, sometimes devotees say, well, we should watch a little bit of TV now and then we can be more normal. It's not good to be too abnormal. But we don't want to be normal by the modern Western ideas. To be normal means that you're just going to hell, forgetting Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches that there are 3 paths leading to hell. Trividham narakasyedam dwaram nashanam atmanaha kamas krodhas tata lobhas tasmat etat trayam tyajit. Krishna says there are 3 gates leading to hell. These are lust, anger and greed. Therefore an intelligent person should give them up. But this whole modern civilization is based on increasing lust, anger and greed. And especially when you turn on the TV, it's all lust, anger and greed. You're simply trying to increase your lust by showing so many romantic scenes, trying to increase your greed by advertisements, buy this, buy that, buy everything else, and increasing the anger by showing so much violence. So really, if we want to become Krishna conscious, we have to give up, to a large extent, we have to give up our connection with that Western culture. It may not be possible to do so totally because we're living in this Western world. But as far as possible, we should try to be, as Krishna gives the example in the Bhagavad Gita, like the lotus which lives in the water but above the water. That we don't take any ideas of morality or ethics or the goal of life or any such thing from the materialistic society, but we take from Krishna as he speaks in Bhagavad Gita. Well, how can we practically do that? Well, let's discuss some of those things. Well, one thing we see, our devotees here are dressed in dhotis and saris, which is very nice. So Prabhupada, he once said that you can become Krishna conscious in a suit and tie. But at the same time, we see himself, he wasn't wearing a suit and tie. In his Grihastha life he did when he was doing business, but he encouraged his disciples as much as possible to wear traditional Vaishnava dress. So as much as we do so, that will, in a subtle way, help us to be Krishna conscious. Because, like I say, this is the dress of the spiritual world, and this helps us to identify ourselves as devotees. And it helps others to also to identify us as devotees. Just like if we're just like a policeman, if he's dressed in his uniform, and people can recognize he's a policeman and they treat him as such. It helps him to perform his function as a policeman. In the same way, if we're dressed as devotees, that helps us to feel more that, yes, I'm here to serve Krishna. So it may not be possible, for instance, if you're a place of work, to dress like that. But at least when you come home, you can dress like that, and when you do your arati and all these things in your home. And actually you could, it's not impossible that you even in your secular activities outside the home, dress in Vaishnav dress. It's not impossible. Especially for ladies, it's more easy to wear sari maybe than for men to wear dhotis. Because here's Ripuha Prabhu, who's sitting at the back here. He's from Zagreb. He'd just like to stand up. So his wife, she made the resolution that, okay, I'm just going to wear a sari everywhere, whatever I do from now on. So, and she said that actually everyone very much appreciated it, especially the ladies. They were saying, oh, this is very nice. And even men could appreciate that this is a very chaste dress. And there are many such cases. There was one young lady who was living in our temple in Manchester in England. And then she enrolled in a secretarial course in the college. But she was used to only wearing sari, so she went in a sari. And the first 1 or 2 days everyone was a little surprised, but then after that it was just like normal. With the difference that everyone respected that this is a religious person. Now, Russia's in this sense not as cosmopolitan as other countries in the Western world, where you see I travel all around England, Germany, America, everywhere dressed like this, and it's quite okay. People, it's quite accepted. But that will come also in course of time in Russia, that as the whole world becomes more multicultural, that people will accept all different kinds of cultures. But you may have to be a little bold and go out in your dhoti and whatever it may be, sari. Just like if you're in your apartment and you're dressed in your dhoti and you have to go out to buy maybe some butter, you don't have to put on a pair of jeans. You can go out in your dhoti also. And then people will ask, what is this? You can tell them, this is the dress of a devotee of Krishna. And they will ask, what is this Krishna? And you can tell them. You'll have a chance to preach. So now from here you'll all be traveling to different places throughout Russia and other CIS countries also. So you don't have to go in kami clothes. You can go in these clothes also. And that's one kind of preaching. Because unless we start to do like this, then even 50 years, 100 years from now, no one will know what this kind of dress means or what it is or what it means. And our movement will always remain unknown and hidden. Now in the 1960s and 1970s, our devotees, they used to go out and do a lot of Harinam in New York City, in all different parts of the city. But then, you see, they started emphasizing more on book distribution and wearing karmi clothes to do book distribution. And then, you see, our devotees got in the habit of wearing karmi clothes, and they didn't even if they had to go somewhere to do something, they would always put on karmi clothes. So it got to the point that if devotees did go out in devotee clothes, people would say, oh, what's this, Hare Krishna, we thought you'd left New York. An opposite example of this is that in the 1980s, myself and there was one other, there was myself and one brahmachari. We were in Bangkok, 2 of us, and we were right in the center of the city. So we were always moving. 2 of us, we were either one by one or together. We were moving around in the city, and then we both left for about a month or 2 months, and we came to India. We came to the Mayapur festival and different meetings and this and that. Then I went to get a new visa in the consulate in Calcutta, for a new visa for Thailand, of which Bangkok is the capital. And the man who gave me my visa, he had just come to the consulate. He'd been posted in Thailand up until recently. He said, where have you been? We didn't see you in Bangkok for so many days. So there are only 2 of us, but we didn't realize how much actually people were noticing us all the time. So that's very good preaching. And especially if we go out and do Harinam, then people, they really recognize that, oh, this is something, this is the Hare Krishna movement. Recently, one man, he took up Krishna consciousness in England, and he was trained in advertising, which is a pretty demoniac kind of business, but anyway, he was trained in that. So he told that when he was doing his course, and he was taking his diploma in advertising, they spoke about our devotees. And the man who was giving the course, he praised this. This going out and singing Hare Krishna in the streets, this is fantastic advertising. He said this is one of the best advertising schemes in the history of the world. You see, in advertising you have to capture people's attention and give them a favorable impression of the product. So you usually have to do something different. If you just put a sign saying that this soap powder is very good in plain letters, it's not going to have any effect. You have to try and do something different. So sometimes they put the writing upside down and it captures your attention and you're trying to read it. Or sometimes they put a very big advertisement with a picture, but there's no writing. You can't say, and then you're looking to see what's it advertising, and you look in the corner and find very small it's written that this soap powder is very good or whatever it should be. They have so many tricks to try to catch your attention. But this man said, you see, the Hare Krishna people, they go out very colorful dress and very different and very joyful and very loud. So he said, anyone who sees that, they'll have an impression which they won't forget. So, of course, going on Harinam Sankirtan is very much central to Vaishnava culture. And even when we're not going on Harinam, as much as possible, if we wear Vaishnava dress and tilak, that will be very nice preaching. I'll tell you another story from California. There are so many stories like this. There was one devotee, and he moved to a new housing area, and he didn't want to. He was feeling a little shy, so he didn't want to tell anyone he was a devotee. So he didn't tell anyone, and he would just every morning he would do arati every morning and evening he would do arati in his home, and he would dress in Vaishnava clothes. But then again he would go outside in Kami clothes, and he wouldn't tell anyone about this. And then after some days, some local people, they approached him on the street, and they said, well, we couldn't help noticing, but through the window we saw that every morning and evening you're dressed in some different kind of clothes. What's all that about? And then he had to explain that actually, you see, I'm worshipping Krishna and all these things. So they said, this is very nice, we want to do that too. Can you please teach us? So we always have to remember that our movement is a preaching movement, and preaching means we have to be a little bold. So wearing Vaishnava dress not only helps ourselves to be Krishna conscious, but it also helps others to know about Krishna. And some people may not like it, or they may make bad comments. But even then, if they think of Krishna, some benefit is there. And many people who, in the beginning, they laugh, but because of exposure to Krishna, then they later become devotees, or at least favorably inclined later. Just like someone became a devotee a few years ago in Berkeley, in California. And he said that, well, when I was a little kid, I used to see the devotees going Harinam, and I used to laugh and joke, and Hare Krishna. He was saying Hare Krishna and hearing Hare Krishna. And not actually offensive, but not favorable, but not offensive. But they had good effect from that. So I'll just change the topic a little bit and go onto one thing that I touched on yesterday or the day before.
It's me and Tim.
No, questions after, not now, the day after tomorrow. I was saying how people are putting their hands in their mouths. And you see, it's a very common thing. People, they chew their nails, or their pen, or they lick their finger and move, or count money, or move the page of the book, or they put their keys in their mouth while they're doing something else. Now, actually it's very unclean, even from a hygienic point of view. As Prabhupada said, the mouth is the most dirty part of the body, is more contaminated than the anus. We actually see that most diseases are orally transmitted. So this, even you see, here I'll just demonstrate what we shouldn't do. People, that's an example of what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't even put our hand like that. If we're eating or brushing our teeth, that's all right. Otherwise, keep our hands away from our mouth. If you've read that book, I Made My Memories of Prabhupada, there's an anecdote in there. That when I was at the fire sacrifice in which I was being Brahmin initiated, there were maybe 200 devotees present, actually more than 200 devotees present. And the whole sacrifice was going on, swaha, swaha, like this. Prabhupada leaned into the microphone and said, stop. He pointed to one corner and he said, this baby has his hand in his mouth. He is contaminating the whole sacrifice. The child was maybe 1 or 1.5 years old. So he told the mother, take him out, wash his hand, and teach him not to put his hand in his mouth. And he said, continue. So like this is very basic points that if we touch our hand to our mouth, it becomes contaminated. And if we don't wash it, then we touch it, we'll open the door handle, and then someone else will touch the door handle, and they'll become contaminated. This is why traditionally Brahmins, they lived in their own areas, and untouchable persons couldn't come within that area, because they had to keep very clean and uncontaminated to worship the Lord. And if we touch something which is contaminated, then whatever else unless we wash, then we contaminate everything else we touch. So admittedly, it's very difficult to maintain the proper standard of purity in the modern age. But there are some basic things which we can learn and adopt in our lives. This basic principle that if we touch something contaminated, then if we touch that to something else, then that also becomes contaminated. Just like if you have washed cloth and you put contaminated, unwashed cloth and you touch it to that, then it all becomes also contaminated, and not you shouldn't perform deity worship. Or you see, if you put freshly washed cloth and you put it on a bed, then that also, because the bed is contaminated because you sleep on it, then you shouldn't actually wear that cloth, and definitely not for deity worship. So you may think, well, what's the problem? It's clean. It's physically clean, but it's subtly contaminated. Many of these rules and regulations in Vedic culture, they are concerned with points which cannot be understood by people who don't understand about subtle nature. Just like we may think, well, why rise early in the morning to chant Hare Krishna? You can rise later and chant also. It's a very subtle point that the atmosphere at that time is more conducive for spiritual life. When we say subtle, that means that you can't measure by any physical means. But if we are ourselves advanced in spiritual consciousness, then we can notice the difference between the early morning hours and the daytime hours. So all these subtle considerations which affect our consciousness are the basis of many of the rules and regulations of Vedic life. For instance, we are enjoined not to eat food cooked by karmis. So we may think that, well, what's the problem? I can just buy a loaf of bread in the shop and I can offer it to Krishna. It's prasadam. You see, I offered it to Krishna, that means it's prasadam. But actually Krishna doesn't like to eat food cooked by those who are not his devotees. And what is more, the consciousness of the cook enters that food. Therefore, if one eats that food, he becomes contaminated by the consciousness of the person who cooked it. Bishoyer onna kaile dushta hoy mon dushta hoyle nahe Krishna shmaran. Krishna bishmarane jivan nashta, like that. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that if one eats grains, specifically grains, cooked or even given by a materialist, then his mind becomes contaminated. Nishfal jiva. And if the mind becomes contaminated, then one cannot think of Krishna. And Krishna bishmarane nishfal jiva. Then the life becomes spoiled and useless. So you may think, well, it's a loaf of bread, I bought it from the shop, and this is food cooked by devotees. It's all food. Chemically, it's the same. So the chemical constitution may be the same, but there are the subtle consciousness which is carried by that food, that cannot be measured by any material means, but it has its effect. So many of the rules and regulations in Vedic life, they are concerned with the subtle atmosphere. Many are for health reasons also, again based on subtle considerations in many cases. Again, rising early in the morning, that's not only good for spiritual practice, but it's better for physical health to sleep at certain times, to eat at certain times. For instance, it's recommended in Ayurveda that one eat the main meal of the day at midday, because there are the three humours within the body, kapha, pitta and vata. Kapha, pitta and vata. So pitta, that is akin to the fire element. So that is strongest at midday. Therefore, that is the best time of day to eat, because that will help digestion. So even though within Vedic life there are so many rules and regulations, they are not arbitrary. Arbitrary means just ad hoc. They're just given without any reason. They're all these rules and regulations, they're actually coming from the Supreme Lord, and they help us to maintain physical and mental health, to have the best social system, so that ultimately we can come to the platform of Krishna consciousness. So, I've just been speaking in a very general way. There's so many points to discuss. And really I have to finish that book, which I'm compiling on Vaishnava culture, etiquette and behavior, which will give many, many of these details. So you can learn many of these things. But one of the reasons it's taking so long is that I'm trying to finish other books also. But when that book comes, then it'll give all kinds of details about. I'll give a list afterwards. But, for instance, how we should offer obeisances. There are many kinds of different speculations about everything. How we should serve prasadam. Actually, sitting on tables, it's not recommended. It's a chair and table. You don't sit on the table, you sit on the chair. Presumably you said that. This posture, sitting on the floor, that is better for eating and better for digestion. And actually, the sister having all the pots on all the food on the table, and as you're eating, you just help yourself to more. It's completely. It's like there's Chinese or French. It's completely lowest of the low subculture, subhuman. You know, the Chinese, like they'll be eating and they'll have all the pots, and they'll be eating with the spoon, and then they'll put the spoon in the pot and take it out. So the actual system, you sit down and you're served. Someone should serve. And there are so many rules in that also. You don't put the sabji on top of the sweet or on top of the salt. Now, one very common thing I'm seeing nowadays is that devotees, when they're serving prasad, they put it right on the plate. Just like if they're serving, they'll touch the spoon right to the plate. If they're putting rice, they'll put it on, and then with the spoon they'll press the rice down. But actually, the serving spoon, or if you're serving, some items are served by hand, then that shouldn't touch the plate, and it shouldn't even touch prasadam, which is on the plate. Otherwise it all becomes contaminated. Actually, prasad doesn't become contaminated. But the person serving, he becomes contaminated in the sense that one should not give one's remnants to others. And just a little should be served of each preparation at a time. Not that you walk up and when he's not even looking, then you put a whole huge pile of something. Because one should, whatever is taken on the plate, one should honor it all. One should not throw away prasadam. Only a guru should leave remnants for his disciples, or a husband for his wife. But prasadam, otherwise we should take whatever comes, we should take and not throw away. These are all very basic points actually, but somehow or other, often we see that our devotees, they're not taught these things. So, Hare Krishna. I just mentioned a few salient points that I'm seeing in day-to-day life. So I hope to bring out that book. Maybe within a couple of years it'll be ready in Russian, and then you can take advantage of it. Sometimes we hear devotees say, "Oh, these things aren't very important. It's just external." Well, it's important enough that the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself follows this culture and has given all these directions in Shastra. And it's important enough that all our acharyas follow this culture. So it's simply arrogance if we think that I don't need it. We do need to follow this culture. So Hare Krishna, time's up for now. So we'll finish with a little